So please take your seats as soon as possible. Thank you. Welcome to today's lecture. And today we are very honored to welcome Professor Zhen Huo as our guest speaker. Professor Huo is an associate professor of economics at Yale University. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota. His research focuses on macroeconomics, international macroeconomics, and information economics. Today is a valuable opportunity for us to hear from a leading scholar in economics, connect academic theories with real-world policy issues, and gain a deeper understanding of how economic policies work in practice. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Huo.
Okay, it's really a great pleasure for me to participate in this event. And I see so many different faces from different countries. And first of all, welcome all of you to China. Particularly, I see so many young faces. I wish I could be young again as your age. And probably you can see that this is one example, and actually it's a sort of like common feature in the profession. If you look at the picture of the professors in the university, typically the picture going to look like 10 years at least younger than they actually are. And this is one example that sort of like reflects the wish that we really want to be young as you guys. I remember like when I was really at your age, I was in high school. By the time I almost decided to study economics, but I didn't know pretty much anything about the modern economics. I read some books about Karl Marx, capital related stuff, but that's all. So I hope like today I use this opportunity to get you some exposure to what actually economists are doing right now. That's one purpose. And hopefully simultaneously the topic itself is to some extent interesting to you. Also, I see that in the last 1 hour or so, you call this international competition, but I see it's more like an international festival. So in this spirit, I hope that instead of thinking about this as a lecture, think about this, you are going to watch a firework of the festival. Okay, so the title of this talk is going to be Fiscal Policy, Theory, Evidence, and Perception. And you will see what I mean by each of these words as the talk move on. A central issue in economics, in macro particularly, is that how could the government actually help to stabilize agri fluctuations? And you typically hear the word like booming, recessions, and so on and so forth. And one object for the government, for the central bank, and so on, is trying to smooth out this process to stabilize agri fluctuation. How can we actually do that? There's many potential ways to do it, but maybe the one of the most popular idea actually proposed by Keynes a long time ago is to increase government spending during recessions. And there are many different ways to do it. So you can think about like, we can build highways initiated by the government, and this is done by many countries in many different times. And also you could just give out consumption coupon to consumers. If you think about the COVID period, if you live in US, you can receive this consumption check. If you live in Hong Kong, there is a direct consumption coupon from Alipay system. And also, you can think about the investment subsidies to firms, and this is what China is trying to do now, sort of to stimulate the economy. So there are many attempts to use government spending to help the economy to recover, to stabilize it. And here are two pictures you can see. On the left, that is a picture actually taken, I think, roughly during the Great Depression in the 1930s, during the US Great Depression. And the idea there is the government actually organized unemployed workers who had difficulty in finding work, trying to build houses. This is like a government-initiated project. This is one idea, trying to use government spending to increase total output. On the right of this picture is in China during roughly 2008, 2009, when they had this 4 trillion massive stimulus package, and China used the money to build this modern highways and so on. So this is kind of like concrete idea what the government actually trying to do. So this is sort of like the kind of like the motivation of this. And moving forward, this is a backward, this is moving forward. What we're trying to do is the following. So first is the theory part. We want to understand like what is the basic logic behind this idea, why you increase government spending can actually help to boost the economy. And within this kind of idea, there's one important notion people talk about. If you read the newspaper, you watch TV, sometimes people talk about is this so-called physical multiplier. The idea is, suppose you increase government spending by $1, how much GDP or total output will increase? Suppose that you increase government spending by $1, GDP doesn't respond at all, then the multiplier would be 0. Suppose you increase government spending by $1, GDP increased by $1, then you have multiplier equal to 1. If that GDP increase more than $1, then you say, oh, there seems to be amplification effects. So one of the debate in economics is how effective should we expect GDP response to be? Should the multiplier be larger than 1, equal to 1, less than 1? What the theory prediction going to be? So that's one of the question. And this is super important for policymaker because that suppose the multiplier is very small, then we can forget about using the fiscal policy to help stabilize the economy. If fiscal multiplier is very large, we know that it's going to be a good idea to use this fiscal policy to help to boost the economy. Okay, that's the theory part. We're going to have some kind of framework to think about this. The second part is the evidence part. How can we actually test the prediction of the theory? And this requires us to look at the data and trying to find a way to help us understand and discipline and test the theory. But different from, say, physics or chemistry, you have controlled experiment in the lab. In economics, this is difficult because it is a very, very difficult to implement a controlled experiment in society. You cannot just say, go to Trump or go to Xi Jinping and say, oh, let's increase government spending suddenly by $1 trillion. That's not going to happen. We had to find some smart way to learn exactly what is the right multiplier. So that's the empirical challenge. And the last part is about the perception. So you can have many theory, many empirical studies about this question. But actually, if you look at, want to ask the actual market participants, like household firms, they may not necessarily know the particular theory we learned from the textbook. And you may be wondering, like, what is the actual mental model, mental theory they are engaging in when they think about this. And to understand this aspect, we require direct surveys on firms and households to understand their actual perception, actual belief about what is the effect of government spending and its subsequent consequences and so on. So these three aspects are going to be what I'm going to talk about one after each other. And in terms of like timeline, let me mention this. So if you focus on the first part, the theory part, we're going to back 100 years ago from the King's idea. The second part, the empirical evidence about the prediction of theory, we're going back to 10 years ago. That's going to be the study we're trying to leverage on. And for the last part, the perception, I'm going to talk about something I'm working on right now. So it's right now. So you can see that a feeling of the development of the theory over the years. Okay. So let me first go to the theory. So this will be something, if you read some of the elementary textbook or some of the popular books, this won't be too strange to you, but let me explain some of the basic equations. And during the video section, I saw like some of you mentioned that there's a minimization, maximization, and this is gonna be simpler than that. So don't be intimidated by the equation. So I want to talk about this original King's idea about this physical theory, government spending logic. So it starts from this so-called King's consumption function. That is the first equation over there. It tells the following story. Think about like what predict your consumption patterns. And the King's proposed this particular consumption function. That is your current consumption can depend on two things. The first one is MPC multiply 1 minus T. The second part is C bar. So what is the first part? MPC is going to be the marginal propensity to consume. It tells you like, suppose today I give you $1. How much of that, what is the fraction of it you're going to use for consumption? Probably going to use all of that, maybe use a part of that. So MPC is going to be something between 0 and 1 that tells you that what is the tendency you actually use that money for consumption. If you think about during COVID period, when the government gave people the consumption coupon, what the government wants them to have is that everybody just spend that coupon and to boost the aggregate demand. But that may not be the case because some people won't spend it. They're actually going to be actually save it. So this MPC is some number between 0 and 1 tell people what is their actually tendency to spend the money. And what is Y minus T in that parenthesis? That's going to be total income, that is a big Y, minus the tax, that's a big T. So Y minus T is going to be disposable income. That is the amount of income you can actually use for consumption. So MPC multiply that would be the amount of consumption that's going to be vary with your income level. And the second part, the C bar, is just some constant, tells you that independent how much money you make, there are some consumption you have to have, like you need to have like, say, a place to live, you need to have some bread to eat and so on. That's independent about how much money you make. So that is the basic consumption function proposed by Keynes. The key thing is that your consumption will be an increasing function of your current income. So that's the first equation. The second equation is we can call it the measurement equation. That is, if you think about the GDP measured by, say, consumption by expenditure approach, you can write GDP as a summation of consumption, which is a private consumption by consumers, plus G, that is the government spending. So government spending will be the variable we're trying to understand its effect. But from the GDP perspective, it will equal to consumption plus government spending. And some of you may read the textbook, you have more complete version of this. You're going to have consumption plus government spending plus investment plus net export. That will be the good measure of GDP. Here, we're going to forget about investment and we're going to forget about net export. Think about this is a closed economy. There's no rest of the world and there's no investment, just consumption. So that would be the GDP. That tells you that if you think about total output, has to come in from aggregate demand, which is the consumption demand and government spending. The third equation down there is national accounting equation. It tells you that suppose you produce something that is GDP, it has to go to somebody as their income. So at the end of the day, from the accounting perspective, it has to be that the GDP equal to total income. So the Y in the first equation enters the consumer's consumption problem will eventually be the same as total GDP in the last equation. Okay, now suppose that you combine these three equations. Think about like you substituting the first equation into the second equation, then you will get something on the right, which is the total output here. Think about the GDP on the left-hand side will equal to MPC multiply the disposable income Y minus T plus this necessary consumption C bar plus government spending. If you look at this equation, this is just nothing but a linear equation. Nothing difficult about it. And from here, you can already solve for what would be the total output in this economy. You can solve for Y, like in solving a linear algebra problem. Very simple. And this equation actually will be the basic for understanding this government multipliers. So let me, instead of solving this directly, I want to show this, visualize this equation for you. So think about like I'm going to do is put the left-hand side and the right-hand side of this equation in the figure. Okay, have this equation in your mind. Let's move to the next page. So this one is trying to visualize the equation. So we know that the total output has to equal to the MPC multiply Y minus T plus C plus G. So this blue line tells you that the total output as a function of income, that in the sense that as a function of this this Y here, it has to be a linear function and increasing function of this income. And that is this blue line trying to capture. Notice that the slope of this line is less than 1. The reason is that the slope of the line captures a marginal propensity to consume. It's somewhere between 0 and 1. You're not going to spend all of that for most people. You're not going to spend 0 of it. So somewhere between 0 and 1. And the other line, this dashed line there, is the 45-degree line. So in the end, it has to be that total output equal to total GDP. If you want to solve for the equation, you want the Y on the left-hand side and the Y on the right-hand side to be equal to each other. So the cross point of these two lines tells you that what would be the GDP of this economy or the total income of consumers. So that is the visualize if you want to solve this, what's going to happen. So now we can move to the question. Suppose now the government have the incentive to actually increase the total GDP by increasing government spending. What would be the effect? So this shows that suppose you increase government spending G from its original level to a new level, plus delta G, that is the increase of the government spending. Think about it, building a new highway, building a new factory. What would happen is that you're going to shift this blue line upwards a little bit because G becomes G plus delta G. So the difference here, the vertical difference between these two lines would be the government spending increase. But itself is not what we're interested in. We're interested in is what is the increase of output. You can see that if you look at this original cross point to the new cross point, that is a shift of level of output. But the shift of level output will be different than the shift of government spending, because government spending shift is this vertical increase, and the shift of this level of output is from one point to the other point. You can visualize that the shift of output is seems to be larger than the shift of government spending itself. And this larger effect is we call the multiplier effects. That's why we want to talk about this multiplier is larger than one, less than one, and so on and so forth. So what is the basic intuition of this discussion? So here is the verbal reasoning of what's happening here. What happens if you increase government spending? Imagine like you're still working this equation and increase in government spending by 1 unit. What happened to the Y, to the output? There are two effects going on here. One is called direct effect. The other is called indirect effect. For the direct effect is, suppose G increased by 1 unit on the right-hand side, mechanically the Y on the left-hand side will also increase by 1 unit. That is direct effect. But that's not the end of the story. Why? Because once you increase government spending, the direct effect increase output by 1 unit. It means that the total income of consumer also increased by 1 unit. Consumer receive this additional 1 unit of income. What are they going to do with that? They're going to spend MPC amount of it. Let's say MPC equals 20%. They're going to spend 20% of this additional $1. So it means that from the aggregate demand perspective, not only G increased by 1 unit, consumption also increased by MPC unit. So the total output increased by 1 plus MPC amount. So you move more than 1 unit. And still, this is not the end of the world. Once that everybody else spend additional money for consumption, it means that the total output will increase additionally, and it will go back to your pocket as additional income. So your income will further increase by MPC amount. You're still going to spend a fraction of it. So you're going to spend additional MPC multiply MPC amount. That's the second round of this effect. And this goes on and on and on. So eventually, what you got this increase of output is 1 plus MPC square plus MPC cubic and so on and so forth. You have all these direct and indirect effects going on. And in total, this is just nothing but a geometric series. It gives you that the total effect is 1 over 1 minus MPC. Because MPC is between 0 and 1, so this ratio here will be some number larger than 1. And this is the so-called the multiplier effect. And this is the celebrated effect because it tells you that the government spending can be quite useful in boosting GDP. And this is the basic building block of King's idea using government spending to help the economy. And even today, this is sort of like the basic insight for all this policy theory discussion. You can have different variation of it, but this is the core of it, and tells you that, oh, it seems to be a good idea to use the government spending to boost the economy. Okay, but this still is something like 100 years ago, people realized this already. And what is the subsequent development of it? So there's many different modern extension of original King's logic. So one example is what about the future income changes? We know that the particular King's consumption function, consumers, they only look at what is their current income, but it's not complete. If you think about like many of you today, your income is close to 0, but you understand like once you go to university, once you graduate, there are going to be very good job opportunity for you. So looking forward, you know that you're going to make big money in the future. So today, your consumption may actually reflect that. So the future consumption, future income will also matter for your current consumption decision. And you need to take into account this forward-looking behavior. And this goes back to so-called the permanent income hypothesis, which is a modern version of the King's consumption function. And also, what about taxes, monetary policy, other variables? And this requires that you have some kind of the so-called general equilibrium thinking. So when the government spending moves, not only that consumption moves, but also you can think about the taxes may move. Government has to use the tax to finance government spending. And maybe like labor market has to move, maybe monetary policy has to respond to it. There are so many other variables going to respond to it. One example is that suppose that the taxes always track the government spending one-to-one. The government always want to maintain a balanced budget. If that is the case, whenever you have the G increase, the T also increase, the disposable income will be exactly unchanged. So all the multiplier effects will disappear. You go back to that multiplier equal to 1, not larger than 1. So the effectiveness of the fiscal policy will greatly decrease. And suppose that the workers are not willing to work extra time, then the increase of government spending may actually crowding out consumption because there's only so much goods. If government spending take a big chunk of it, consumer can only take a smaller chunk of it. And if input price and the wages increase, firm will be less willing to expand the production. This also will hurt the effectiveness of the government spending. So with all of this modern extension, all of this consideration, it boils down to an empirical question in the end, which is what is the actual physical multiplier? In a theory, it could be larger than 1, it could be maybe equal to 1, could be less than 1, depending on which version of a theory you take. But how can we know that in the data, in the actual world, it is what is the size of it? And this requires us to look at some evidence, and that's going to be the second part of it. And also, if you think about what I write down here is the particular version of the theory. It's just like a textbook version. People find it particularly convenient to use it to think about this issue. Many of the people outside this classroom, the household, the firms, each one of them have the particular understanding of the world. They may or may not agree with a particular framework we just put down here. And suppose everybody have a different perception about the economy, how the economy works, what would be the outcome of that? And as a kind of like a positive question, what is actually people's perception about all of this discussion? Do they agree with the textbook prediction? Are they aware of this? So that's a different question. We're going to touch that in the end of this talk. Okay, so now let me move to the second part. What is the actual physical multiplier we can try to learn from the data? So that's about empirical estimate. Okay, this is not an easy task. The reason is that in order to identify this physical multiplier, what you need is ideally a situation where seems the economy is in a normal time, nothing happened, and suddenly, unexpectedly, the government decide to increase government spending for a certain amount. And you can look at what is the GDP's response, consumption response, and so on and so forth. That is the ideal case. But such ideal case doesn't exist. So most cases, if you look at the variation of government spending, it typically coming from, for example, there is this kind of stimulus package in response to a recession, in response to financial crisis, in response to COVID, and so on. So when you look at the response of the GDP, it not only reflects the changes of the government spending, but also the fundamental changes in the environment, like there is oil price increase, the COVID making people hard to find work, and so on. So that makes it difficult to identify the pure effects of government spending. And also, whenever you have such a situation like in a crisis, not only physical authority going to respond to it, monetary authority will also respond to it, trying to cut interest rate and so on. So what you see, the change of GDP may also be the effect of, say, a lower interest rate instead of a higher government spending. So how can we isolate the pure effects of government spending to identify the right number of government spending multiplier? So this is a social science, it's not a science. There's no perfect way to do it. But it seems to be that within the profession, the consensus is that the best way so far is to look at the changes in national defense, in military spending. Those changes are closest to some exogenous, unexpected government spending changes. And also they are large in terms of magnitude to give us some kind of meaningful response of the economy. So the empirical strategy here is we're going to look at this large plausible exogenous defense spending movement as the shock, as government spending shock. So let me show you some pictures so you can see that what we are talking about. So this two figure shows you that in the US, what is the real defense spending per capita and what is the total real government spending per capita over time. So if you look at the top line here, top figure here, that shows you that there is a variation in the real defense spending per capita over time. In the 1950s, there's a spike, that is the US and the Korean War. In the 1960s, there's another spike. There's a Vietnam War. If you go to 2000, then it's a 9/11 event and so on. So you can imagine like there's a different events going on in the world corresponding to these changes in the government defense spending. And to a large extent, these changes are exogenous. It's not like US can actually plan ahead so that they know this is going to happen. And it's also translating to in the picture down there that in terms of like a total real government spending, those variation in the defense part also reflecting to the real government total spending per capita. And this figure further shows that if you decompose the government spending into three different components, the defense part, the non-defense federal part, the state and the local part, you can see that the non-defense federal part and the state and local part, they are either kind of like quite stable, there's not much variation, or there's just like their secular trend, very little kind of cyclical movement. Only this national defense variation, it is sizable and really volatile. That gives us that you can use those variation in the national defense spending as the exogenous government spending shocks. So here, what we're going to do is we look at those spike in the national defense and trying to see what is the response of a GDP total output to that. So that gives us a plausible estimate of a possible physical multiplier. And this is the picture shows that what is in the end you can learn from those events. So on the left is the variation in the government spending. This is like a typical event you can think about from this national spending, defense spending variation. So the horizontal axis is the quarters after the shock happens. On the left, you can see that roughly after 8 quarters, which is 2 years, the national spending peaks, and the peak number is about 1 unit, that is a scale. On the right-hand side, that is the GDP response to it. You can see that the peak is 0.3. So if you do the math here, national spending increased by 1 unit, GDP increased by 0.3 unit. The ratio of this is 0.3. It tells you that empirically, if you do this exercise, what you can find that is the physical multiplier is way less than 1. In the theory, from the King's original idea, it is way above 1. But empirical estimate tells you that actually that's not the case. It's very less than 1. And now if you think about it, you are an economist, you're going to speak to the policymaker in your country. Would you recommend to use the fiscal policy to stimulate the economy when it comes in a recession? So you have to be careful here because that the theory and the empirical estimate can be very different. Okay. However, this is still not the end of the story because this is only one of many estimates, even though people sort of like in the profession think that this is probably the best estimates, but still there is many caveats associated with that. For example, the particular size of this multiplier can depend on so many things. You can imagine like whether this happens in the normal time or in the recession, multiplier can be very different. People believe that in the recession time, this is going to be multiplier going to be much higher. And also depend on implication, depends on what types of goods and services the government actually purchase. If they just buy, say, normal services, say, hire more people versus they put the money into R&D and the effects can be different. Also depend on the persistent, whether spending is a transitory or is a really permanent increase, also matter for the estimates. So bottom line is that this is still a very active research question in both academia and the policy institutions, and just give you sort of a scratch of what people are actually trying to do here, trying to understand the scope of it, the magnitude of it. Okay. Okay. So let me use the maybe last maybe 5 minutes also to talk about the perception. So this is about how people, the firms, the household in the real economy, how they actually think about what's going on. If you think about it, like suppose now there is an announcement from the government that they're going to increase the government spending. You can ask the question for the household and the firms. Does such announcement actually improve firms' expectation about aggregate and their idiosyncratic conditions? The theory predicts so, but it's actually the case that firms actually believe that. And does like different firms respond differently depending on their characteristic, whether they have like a demand constrained firm, whether they have financial frictions or not. So all of this kind of like the real world relevant question, you cannot seek answers from the theory. You have to somehow get your hands dirty to learn from the actual firm, actual household, do some field work to get some surveys of people. So this is what I'm trying to talk in the last part. What we're going to do is to show you that using a particular policy event and a survey platform in China, try to shed some light on these questions. So the idea is we're going to look at Alipay, and some of you may already install the Alipay app to do this payment. So in China, many of the micro and the small enterprises, they make and receive payments via Alipay. And nowadays, about 50% of the China's mobile payments is through this platform. So what we do is we conduct an online survey on this Alipay and trying to ask questions for this micro and the small enterprise managers. What is their opinion about micro and macro expectations about what's going to happen? And what is particular unique is that in 2024, in September, China actually make announcement about a large-scale physical expansionary program. And in this announcement, when we send out the survey, some of the firms receive the survey, finish survey before the announcement, some finish survey after the announcement. So we can do a natural comparison for those finish survey before and after announcement to see how different their belief is. And this you can use to test our theory to think about how people actually think about this announcement. So the basic information is that we're going to look at this micro and small enterprises. So we're going to look at the quarterly frequency, roughly about the 6,000 firms participate in the survey every period. We're going to use the survey to ask them questions like, what is your expectation about your orders, your sales, your operation cost, and the question about the prices, the wages, and the input prices you're facing, and what is the expectation about whether they're going to increase or decrease, and so on. And also, we're going to ask them that what is opinion about the GDP growth rate, house price growth rate, and so on and so forth. So this is the timeline we're trying to utilize. So this is in 2024. In September 26, in China, the Politburo make a statement that they're going to increase the government spending. And we can look at the survey return before this day and after this day to do the comparison. If it's after this day, it means that the firms already registered that there's going to be an increase of government spending, and their response, their expectation already be shifted. We can see that how they're going to make the shift of the firm's expectation. And here is the figure shows you that what is the firm's belief actually in the real world. So you can see that here is the question asking them what is the expectation about China's GDP growth rate in the next year. So before the 2026 announcement, roughly is slightly below 3%. They are kind of pessimistic about the economic outlook. But after this announcement, this belief about GDP growth rate increased to something like 3.5%. Just announcement itself is quite effective actually to boost people's economic outlook. This is consistent with the theory that actually increased government spending is quite effective in saving their confidence, in managing their expectation. Not only improved aggregate expectation, we can see that simultaneously, the firm feel like their orders, revenue also tend to increase. And also we can see that the firm believe that their cash flow going to increase. financial demand going to increase, the probability of shutdown going to decrease. So they're really optimistic about what's going on, not only about the macro condition, but also about their idiosyncratic conditions. One piece of this is a little bit maybe different or surprising compared with the textbook prediction is that the firms believe that after this announcement of physical expansion, their own price will increase. Their employment will increase. They think the wages will increase to some extent. But at the same time, they believe that the cost will actually decrease, and they don't think that the input price will increase. And this is different from textbook prediction. In the textbook, all the firms will increase their price because the economy become better. And your price could be the other firm's input prices. But here, when the actual firm think about this, they do not think that deep. They think that, okay, my price will increase because my demand will improve, but I do not think that my input price, which is the price of other firms, will actually increase. So this is somehow not fully rational as the textbook would predict, but this is super useful for policy perspective because that when these firms, they have this partial equivalent thinking, they do not recognize that other firms will also increase price. They tend to be overconfident. And this will making the policy announcement particularly powerful. And the government would like to see it actually. And this is something you can learn from the actual survey, but it's hard to learn from a textbook theory model. Okay? So let me conclude here. I want to use this particular topic to show you that economics, if you want to do it, it's actually quite inclusive subject in the sense that you can do many things of it. You can do math, you can do empirical analysis, you can do survey, you can talk to people, do the field experiment, but it requires the rigor, the creativity, and entrepreneurship to do it well. And in the end, thank all of you and wish you all the best going forward studying economics. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Huo. We will now move into the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Huo, for giving us this wonderful lecture. And I really think I got a couple of insights from it. One question I have is that I actually believe in a statement, as I did in my introduction video of our national team. I believe that markets are not ends unto themselves, but rather means for us to pursue worthy aims. I think this is somehow correlated with your lecture, and I would really like to know your opinions or comments on this statement. Yeah.
Sorry, say the statement one more time.
My apologies. The statement is markets are not ends unto themselves, but rather tools for us to pursue worthy aims.
In plain words, what would it mean?
So it means that we should not like pursue for a specific type of market, like let's say capitalism or common, but rather like we should care about its implication in the real world.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. I totally agree with that statement. You can see that I think like a great lesson or experience in the last 40, 50 years is that maybe the contrast between the development in China versus the development in some Latin American countries. I think like roughly in the beginning of the 1990s, there was like this massive movement trying to implement the so-called the capitalism or marketism in many countries in a very kind of drastic way. And we see that the outcome compared with China, which on the other hand took like more like a gradual way and catering to this particular institution and the background and the particular environment. And China seemed to be very, very successful, and other countries sometimes experience like a really bad outcome. And this tests that you have to kind of deviate, not giving the full trust to the textbook theory. You have to think about what is the particular context of the of the economic question, economic problems. And here is one example of that. Another example is that the industry policy. So China has been famous for its industry policy, but in the past, many push back on that. People think that, okay, it's just a waste of resources because like at the end of the day, it's entrepreneur, the market gonna do the identify what is a good investment projects, which are not a good investment project. The government is not going to beat the market on that. But in the last several years, particularly see the rise of EV in China, and even the World Bank, IMF now shifted their tone. They try to study China's strategy, and in the US, they're also trying to implement their particular industry policy. So this kind of like what is right, what is wrong, what should be the right institution, what is the right strategy changes over time. And the economists may not know it the best. And the real world teaches us like what is the best really.
Yeah. Thank you for the answer. I think economics indeed should be grounded in reality.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mobin. I have two questions. First, go to previous slide, if it is possible. Previous, thanks. One more.
One more.
I think previous. One more. Sorry. Okay, here, after treatment, the expectation about grow far worse off. The people expect less grow and then start to growing and became better. I didn't understand why.
Maybe I should explain this better. So this shows that this is this particular vertical line here is when the government make announcement about this massive physical expansion.
Yes.
And before that, this is the level of the forecast about the GDP growth rate, which is slightly below 3%.
Yes.
And once you make announcement, overall, this is going to increase. You can see that this particular point as made, I guess, is what you're wondering is below here.
Yes.
And this is because typically there is some kind of a small sample issue. And you can see there's a band here tells you that, okay, you should not really trust this particular point. You should really think about like within this range is all possible. Overall, you can see that it takes some time also for people to sort of like register this message. And after a couple of days, clearly it increases.
Thank you, I got it. But I have one more question. Why we choose wars and military spending? I say you one of my observation. In my country, Iran, after war, the people save more because they expect the future became worse. It is a negative shock, but itself and can decrease GDP. Maybe it is one reason why the multiplier from your estimate. I don't know. It is your estimate.
Not my estimate.
From this estimate is lower than
okay
prediction.
That is a good concern, and it's sort of like in the US it's slightly different because US even is a war is in other countries, so it's from their perspective it's really like increase of the government spending. But there's associated with a social issue and so on and so forth. It's not like a pure government spending shock, but to a large extent you can think that is. But this is saying that if you do this in other countries, be more problematic. In the US, it seems to be more or less acceptable to take this idea. But I totally agree with you that if you think about this, there are many issues associated with that. And here, at least some of the issues. It's not like a complete list. You can definitely question that. And that's why I say that it's still active research question, and there's no definite answer to that yet.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Professor. I'm sorry, I got the mic before I got the mic. You mentioned the flawed expectations by the businesses in the last slide. You mentioned the expectations of firms in one of the last slides.
Yeah, I mean, you go down there. This one?
The previous one.
First one. You want this one?
No, the one after that.
Okay.
Yes. How would these expectations that you could say are flawed, how would these expectations affect the GDP multiplier compared to a perfect expectation?
Okay, that's a good question. So I would say that actually this result show that tend to give you a bigger multiplier than the typical theory for two reasons. One is that more about this last part I mentioned, that the firms they do not seem to perceive that other firms also tend to increase their prices, and this will making firms production costs to be higher. They do not register that, so this will give firm more reason to make expansion. And in the standard theory, firm would internalize that, and this making them their expansion motive weaker. So in reality, this margin seem to help to get a larger multiplier. On the other hand, in the standard theory, what happens is when you have this national-wise government spending increase, and the firms will think about is really the aggregate condition improve. But here it seems beyond that, which is firm trying to extrapolate this idea, think about their idiosyncratic condition will also improve. And this is another kicker for getting a larger multiplier. The standard theory will say, okay, my idiosyncratic condition and aggregate condition, they should be orthogonal to each other. But the firms seem to be somehow confusing the mix of this. And when they get the positive signal, they think both going to improve. And that's why I think like this will give you actually a larger multiplier than the theory would predict.
Hello, Professor. I am Ahmed and I am from Team Pakistan. So my question to you would be about the multiplier effect and specifically about how information friction distorts the actual multiplier that we get. That is the difference between the Keynes multiplier. So do you think, and is there a way that we can actually quantify how much of the actual multiplier is lost because of information friction? For example, policyholders having disagreements over policies or not understanding or misinterpreting policies while implementing them in the country? Thank you.
I think that's at least to the data we have right now in the profession and the type of survey we can run right now in the profession, it's really hard to pinpoint a particular multiplier, internalize all the frictions. The reason is that you can design like a hypothetical questions and ask people. That is more like a controlled experiment, like a physics, like chemistry. But typically people think that in the actual world versus this hypothetical sort of like experiments, the results or the response will be different. When you actually move to the actual policy shock, like we did here, it is hard to have like a survey to ask all the questions to sort of like a pinpoint the degree of all kinds of information or behavioral friction. Here, what you see is sort of like you see some kind of facets of this friction, but it's not a complete picture of it. To move to the stage, you can say quantify whether it's 1.2, 1.5 or the multiplier. This is not sufficient. This only tells you like there is a tendency to be higher or lower than the otherwise frictionless benchmark.
Oh, sir, just a small follow-up on that. How do you think then us as students or you as professors work towards finding out a method or finding out a way to quantify these variables and quantifying these ways?
I think like this requires mostly, I think this requires like we need better data infrastructure. So nowadays, in many countries, particularly in the central bank, they start to get more and more administrative level data to get like really detailed transaction level data about the behavior of firm and household, together with survey questions about what their expectation is. Once we get more and more on this data, we can understand more and more about different aspects of the theory that are required to quantify this. I think this is, to some extent, require the whole profession and particularly the involvement of the government to give us this infrastructure, the opportunity to do it. And also as students, once you become graduate students, become professor, you can also help to push this movement. Like for this survey, actually, I helped to initiate this to do it in China. So help a little bit of that. You can also do that in the future.
Hi, my name is Kanav and I'm from Team Nepal. So my question was regarding a statement you made about economics not being the same as a natural science. As economists, should we strive to make the methodology of our experiments more similar in natural science, or should we embrace the social aspect of it?
I think the main difference is in terms of methodology, actually, they're quite universal. Like if you look at, say, in medical science, if you study like what is the effects of a new drug, for example, the particular methodology they use is actually almost identical. Maybe actually economics influence a lot about how they actually evaluate the effects. So on that part is universal. What is really different is in economics, they have this social part of it, which is you cannot, particularly in macro, for example, it's hard to do like large scale experiments. Nowadays, there's more and more these field experiments that's moved towards that. But still, if you think about the monetary policy or physical policy, it is hard to do like a controlled experiment of that. That is what I think separates economics or maybe in general social science versus science.
Thank you.
All right. So I had a question about the graph you showed earlier. Towards the end, it starts dropping rather than the predicted growth due to the first statement. Could you explain why exactly it proceeds to stabilize?
I think like the initial dropping on the vertical line, that is more like a sampling issue.
Towards the end, the curve, it starts going back down to how it was initially.
Oh, that part I think is also tend to be the sort of like a sampling issue. If you look at, say, focus on sort of the band of around it, it has this increasing trend of it. And this is because of the nature of the survey, each of the point roughly have only a couple hundreds of observations. So there is a large sampling error associated with that. So it's not as precise as we would like to be.
Also, I had a second question about, because the initial statement was about fiscal theory, right? And normally when fiscal multiplier increases, it's due to a decrease in GDP. So how exactly does this increase in GDP change the fiscal multiplier in China due to the statement, due to the survey?
Also, could you just repeat the last part of it?
How exactly is the, like, because the GDP was affected by the statement that was given by the Chinese government.
Yeah.
How exactly does that affect the fiscal multiplier?
Okay. I think there are two questions. One is that you say that the government's spending multiplier typically estimated during the recession, right? I would be more precise about that. The rest statement is the large-scale government expenditure stimulating package typically launched during the recessions, but variation in government spending happen all the time, like those wars. This increase of national defense spending doesn't necessarily happen in the recession, could actually happen in a boom in normal time and so on. And the estimate of the multiplier, depending on whether it's a boom or it's a recession, could be different. The second part is, I guess the question is about what we can learn from this about the physical multiplier, right? So here, this figure is slightly less about the particular quantitative magnitude of multiplier. This is more about testing the mental model of firms and households actually use. It could well be the case, if you think about it, is all the people believe that increased government spending completely crowding out consumption and investment. There should be zero effect on the economy. And if anything, maybe that increased government spending means that increase of current or future taxes. That could be totally a bad thing for the economy. But this confirmed, number one, is that actually most firms and households believe that actually increase this government spending is a good thing for the whole economy. This is not you shouldn't have the prior that this should be the case. Actually, this tell you that actually this is the case. So it's more like a give you a verification of the particular theorem, of particular direction of the theory. Yeah.
Very much. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh. Hi, my name is Shashank from Team USA. I also had a question about this graph.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how do you separate for this identification strategy? How do you separate between like expectation updating and information acquiring? So like the two different approaches. So I was just wondering, like, how does that work? How do you like differentiate between both the aspects?
I guess like see if I get a question. So imagine I do the following, which is so-called the high frequency identification. Imagine like this actually the political bureau statement was published roughly 1 p.m. On that day. I could look at before 1 p.m. and after 1 p.m. on the same day. What is the difference? In this case, it is a kind of like a more purified version of this identification. I think an alternative do, which you see here, like over the days going forward. So over days, there is additional, you can think about like a register what's actually happening, gradually learning all these additional effects can actually kick in. So I didn't show you the results. I could show you like within the same day, the difference and compare with this over the 1 week before, 1 week after. So the second one will also internalize all the information acquisition, all the learning aspect of it. But in principle, we could do it and show you, but just I don't have that slide prepared for that question. But
Okay.
that's a legitimate question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I have a question too. My name is Jesse from Team USA, and my question is regarding the MPC and multiplier effect.
Yeah.
So in like Keynesian economics, like how would the government control spending with regards to the MPC and multiplier effect to like control like a tough situation like stagflation?
Could you say the last sentence one more time?
Oh yeah, how would the government use the knowledge of this MPC and multiplier effect to like stabilize a tough situation like stagflation?
Okay. I think like the most cases when people think about MPC, they think about this still as like a primitive of the consumer's preference, not something directly controlled by the government. Say someone is say you are a the empirical pattern is something like the poor guy typically have higher MPC and the rich guy have a lower MPC. And unemployed people have a higher MPC, employed people have a lower MPC and so on. The government can only influence this MPC indirectly through, say, if you can relax the borrowing constraint, let's say you want all the big commercial banks to extend the credit limit for the consumer. Suppose you can do that. Then this can indirectly influence the MPC, but this is not like a regular policy tool the government tend to employ. But suppose they can do that, then the right movement should be that in particular the time when you have a deep recession, what you really want to do is trying to enlarge this MPC so that the government spending multiplier effects tend to be larger. But it has like, this maybe goes too much a detour. Depend on really like your perspective. Suppose you want the fiscal policy to be the dominating policy tool to stabilize the economy, you should make MPC as large as possible. But on the other hand, suppose you want to use monetary policy, like movement of interest rate as the main tool to stabilize the economy, you may want the opposite, which is you want MPC to be as small as possible. Suppose you are getting to the zero lower bound issue, you lose all the ability of using monetary policy, and you should maximize MPC. But still you are far away from the zero lower bound. You can still use monetary policy. Maybe you want to actually have a normal size MPC, a dependent situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, but due to the limited time, I think we must call an end to today's session. Thank
Thanks
you
very
all
much.
for your very active participation. And once again, thank you, Professor Huo. Before we end the session, I'm going to give the stage back to Mr. Philip, who will share with us the next following arrangements.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So here we have a few things to do. After the end of the lecture, we will begin the campus tour, and the campus tour will end in the place where you will do the technical tests. So please be prepared. And after the technical test, you will have some ice-breaking activity as well as welcome dinner. The dinner is Chinese food. I hope you like it. It is what we eat every day in this school. So, okay. Before you start the campus tour, I need to remind you a few things about our school facilities as the host. Our school has door locks almost everywhere. So if you can't open the door, please try to ask our staff for help. Some doors may be locked and it need door access. So for example, when you use the classroom for business case preparation a few days later, you will be assigned a room, right? So the suggested way to use the classroom is you leave like 1 cm space and do not really close it, because if there's a door lock, you may not be able to reopen it. So whenever you use our classrooms for preparation and other purposes, you may try to avoid closing the door completely, because once the door lock is activated, you will need someone to unlock the door for you. And also during your stay in our campus, please be reminded that there are some floors and some areas with other activities going on at the same time. So unless we tell you that this is the room you should go, please do not try to explore other areas of our school. I know you are very interested, and I'm sorry if you want to play football or basketball. Sorry, there may be other users in that sports hall or sports ground. Of course, taking pictures are welcome, but please do not interfere with other activities going on in this school at the same time. By the way, we have toilets every floor and also water filling machines every floor. If you want to fill in your bottle, you are very welcome to do so. If there are other questions, you may ask the volunteers or our staff. So I think now you are ready to start the campus tour. I think on your badge, it says which exam room you will go to, right? On your contestant badge, it says which exam room you will go to. That means you will go to different routes, different paths of the campus tour, depending on which exam room you go to. Are you clear? Is everybody okay?